Great. Okay, let's give this thing a go. Buying a new build in the Netherlands. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Kimo. I am the founder of Expat Housing Network, and I'm half Dutch, half Caribbean. I have a daughter who is 5, almost 6. 2 weeks from now, she'll turn 6, but she already thinks she's 16, and that's good fun. So puberty hit early for her. No, but it's all good. I really love her. So, and I bought my own home about 6 years ago, just before we had our daughter, and back then the market was already quite competitive, and I had no or very little knowledge about buying a house. So it took me quite a while to actually get an offer accepted. So after my seventh offer, we finally got an offer accepted. So I know what it's like to kind of like be in a competitive market. Once that happened, I was like, hey, but I think there's a lot of value in learning more about how to actually help people find and secure a home. So back then, Expat Housing Network was very much focused on helping people find a home to rent. And then we decided to really dive into the whole buying process. And in 2018, we launched. And since then, we've been helping a lot of people buy a home. Now, I must say, this is something that I have not been doing recently. My team has been doing that, and I'm joined today by lovely people. First of all, I'm joined by Andrew from Viisi. He'll introduce himself in a few, but I also have two of my lovely colleagues with me, Rafaela and Rick. And I must say that by now they are more experienced with buying homes than I am, so they will be actually helping out with the Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop it into the Q&A, and we will try and answer them during the session, and otherwise at the end of the session. Yes? Perfect. Was there anything else I would like to share about myself? No, it wasn't. Andrew, would you like to give a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kimo, for the introduction. So my name is Andrew Aziz. I work at Viisi Expats. We're a team of 60 persons. We actually are now around 70. We're growing quite quickly as well. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, but my parents are from Egypt. Got married a year ago and also bought a property a year ago. So it was, a few months ago, but I got married on a Monday, got the keys to my property on a Wednesday, and then flew on my honeymoon. So it was quite a hectic period, but glad that I had the opportunity to buy a property, and hopefully we can help you with that as well. I'll be presenting a few slides later on about the few things with regards to the financing to keep in mind.
Perfect. Thanks for the intro, Andrew, and happy to have you. Today, we'll focus on a few things. We're going to go over, of course, the introduction we just did, the pros and cons of buying off plan, some market information, pricing costs to take into account, the actual process, the 5% rule and the guarantee, and places where to actually find a new listing or a new build. And then financial topics and mortgage info. This is really the domain of Sir Andrew. Now, let's dive into the background first, because I always believe that greatness is achieved in the agency of others, right? And like I mentioned, my team has now become more experienced than I am, so a lot of the questions that they have, they actually answer themselves, and I can't answer them because they've been going through that process much more often than I have. And I believe that if you decide to work with us, you'll get to meet one of these lovely people in a team, and you'll actually be able to experience their work firsthand. Definitely great to introduce them. Then now, looking for a new home or a new build, what are the pros and the cons? So when it comes to the pros, it's very important to understand that when you buy a new build, you don't have a property that you can move in yet directly, right? So there is a plan that is out there on the market. The developers draft something, and what you can do is, because you're very early in the stage of this process, you can still how do you say that, impact the actual planning a little bit. So if you would like things to be changed in the planning, in the drawing of the property, if you would like to kind of like install certain things, kitchen, bathroom, to your liking, you can do that. So you can actually make the property a little bit more of your own taste, right? Also, the energy label, especially nowadays, very relevant, is really good. Most energy labels for new developments are A plus. So the government's quite strict on what the quality of that is. So the third thing is that maintenance is limited. Of course, it's a new build, right? So you can't expect the same kind of like maintenance as a very typical characteristical property in one of the major cities. So that's quite nice, because when you move in, you don't have to worry about maybe a leakage or this or that, right? So that is quite nice. Also, there's no transfer tax. Very, very interesting. So transfer tax for properties that you purchase, and I think that Andrew, you'll refer a little bit to that as well a little bit later in your presentation. Currently is 2%, right? Of course, depending on a few criteria, but you won't have to pay that, which is quite nice. And then also no appraisal needs to be done because the actual purchase price by the bank is to be considered the value of the property. Now, so those are the pros, right? So there's a lot of pros, quite nice. You can influence it. From a financial side, it's quite interesting, and energy label as well. What are some of the cons? Well, the con is that you can't actually see what you're buying, right? So you can't see the property itself. You have to have a little bit of imagination. Of course, they often create these beautiful kind of like 3D images, right? And they have a very detailed plan of what will be where and there, but you can't go to the property and stand in the middle of it and kind of like get an experience of it. So that is something that is good to be mindful of. So you know that you're buying something that requires a little bit of imagination. Um, so the subscription to be able to buy. So what is good to know is that when you look for property, you'd have to kind of like often subscribe because there might be other people that actually also are interested in buying that new place, right? So you'll end up maybe on a list, and I think depending a little bit on the how do you say that, the demand and supply for that property, this is good to be mindful of that. Yeah, there's a different process, and we'll talk about it a little bit later as well. Then, of course, you don't have the property to move into. So there's going to be a year, 2 years, depending on how fast the actual developer is with completing the property, that you don't have your new place yet. So that also means there'll be double the cost. So it's good to actually understand that. Also, with the terms of negotiation, this is an interesting one because I was reviewing this presentation from my colleague, and there's less negotiation compared to some of the older build properties that you can actually purchase. Now, I must say there is a bit of a tip in the market, so this might change to some extent. However, they're a little bit more set on the price. If it's an asking price, often you'll see that you'll pay the asking price. In the past, sometimes it was even some overbidding, but now we're seeing that it's a little bit close to the actual asking price. And I feel that maybe in the near future there might be even some more room to actually negotiate. And like I mentioned, you don't have a property to move into a year, 2 years from directly. So you'll have to wait a year to 2 years from now. What that means is that you'll have a mortgage on your new property. We'll talk about that details a little bit later. But you also have your current rent, right? So you'll have actually more costs for the time being. So it's good to be mindful of that. And I believe that the actual value of the property that you're buying is not necessarily double the cost compared to existing houses, but you do have kind of like a costly thing you need to take into account. By the way, again, any questions that you have, put them into the Q&A, and Rafaela and Rick will jump on them. Now, some market information. Last quarter's numbers, good to be mindful of this. Like the amount of properties for sale has dropped significantly compared to the year before that. Also, if you look at the actual average house prices, it went up. And I think that even for the third quarter, it indeed went up a little bit as well. And then we have the days to sale, which is about 30 days. And I think that what is good to understand with this is that the new build projects often they have like a bit of a lead time, right, before the developer can like actually start with that. What we're seeing is there's a bit of a decline, and maybe this is the actual no let me go back. What we're seeing is there's a bit of a decline on new projects and new build projects that are planned also for the foreseeable future. There are definitely some government regulations that play into this, but also things like material costs, but supply chain issues as well. So what we're seeing is that most likely in the near future, the near next couple of years, we'll see less new build properties on the market versus what we've seen in the past. And that will have an impact as well on, of course, things like price and the number of days to sale. There's more things linked to those last two elements, so the price and the days to sale. But if you're interested in buying a new build, like I wouldn't wait for a couple of years because the actual amount of new builds that you might have access to will decrease somewhat. Now, this is also an interesting graph that I'd like to see you. This is the actual amount of new builds sold So if you look at the different quarters, then there is a decrease in number of new builds sold in this year. Now I must say you see like a wave going on constantly, right? But I do feel that with the current market conditions and the number of new build properties on sale, we're seeing that decline a little bit more. So if, for example, the amount of people that are interested in new builds stays somewhat consistent, but the actual amount of supply drops a little bit, there might be a little bit more competition. If, however, they both go down a little bit, then we'll see that the competition will stay somewhat the same. Predicting how the future market will look like I mentioned, supply will decline to some extent, right? And also with the current kind of like market conditions, not necessarily from a supply and demand, but more from a okay, how much do things cost, right? We see inflation coming up and so on. That will have an impact on the new builds as well in the next couple of years. So I believe that yeah, it's as good a time as any. And often people ask me, is it a good time to buy? Well, my suggestion and my response always is don't look at the timing, look at the amount of time you spend in the market. I think that it was Warren Buffett who said it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. Technically, the same thing applies for properties as well, right? If you buy, don't buy for a year or 2 years, buy for an extended period of time. Also, it goes for the new build. So there's no real difference there. Now, some prices and costs. Let me take a quick sip of water. Um, the benefits of buying a property off plan are partly in the price, because when you buy a property off market or sorry off plan, there's a couple of things that are actually included in the price. And one of the things that we refer to when you buy a property of plan is something called free by name. And technically, what that means is that when you buy a property, it has not been owned by anyone else yet, except for the developer, of course, right? And the developer actually delivers it to you, and you buy it, and therefore you have certain kind of like how you say that advantages to it. Like for example, and this is not in order of what the highest fee is that you actually save, but VAT, I'm going to start actually at the bottom. VAT is a very, very interesting one because that's actually included in the purchase price because you're buying from a developer. Technically, that's a company and they would have to charge VAT, right? But it's included in the actual purchase price and included in the land as well. The transfer tax, like we refer to as well, also applies for this one. And also the registration in the land registry, which is the public record where they keep all of the information about who owns what property, the size of property, and stuff like that, is included in the price. And also the notary fee of the transfer deed. So not of the mortgage deed, but of the transfer deed is included in the price. So again, all of these things will save you. Well, how would I much better say? It depends a little bit, of course, on the actual price. VAT is linked to the actual price, but the notary fee and the registration fee will save you well, €1,000, a little bit more than that. Also, what I discussed a little bit earlier on was that the appraisal is not necessary. So again, that is a extra little bonus. Looking at the overall cost that you would need to kind of like bring to the table, and I think that Andrew, you have also a very a clear overview of that, which is something we call purchase costs. So when you buy a property, there are costs linked to the actual purchase of the property, and we call them purchase costs or closing fees, purchasing fees. And in the left corner, you see the type. In the middle, and by the way, good to know that this presentation will be shared with you, so you don't need to write everything down, right? So don't, or you can take a photo, but you can actually get this presentation in your mailbox, I think tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. On the left side, we see the type. In the middle, we see the amount. And on the right side, we see if it's tax deductible. The tax deductibility part states that you can actually deduct this amount of your taxable income at the end of the year, right? So you will save, or you will actually get some money back, because you've actually can deduct it from the taxable income. So take into account that you'll probably get about 35 to 37 or 40% back of the actual amounts that you're paying. So when we look, for example, at the mortgage deed, this is something that you can actually deduct off your taxable income. Now, maybe one more thing to add is that the government has trying to make it, or trying to motivate people to actually get experts on board like Andrew and VC when it comes to any mortgage related matters, right? Because mortgages are not easy products. So make sure you get somebody in to actually support you I have not worked with Andrew personally, but I've heard great stories about him. So I think that you guys are in good hands with VC. But the reason why they want to make it more attractive for you to kind of go to a specialist is to make sure that you make the right decision. How did they motivate you? By actually making it tax deductible. So the mortgage deed by the notary is tax deductible, but also the bank or the mortgage broker is tax deductible. Anything else? So the appraiser, technically, you will need an appraiser, but if you would go for an appraiser, it would be tax deductible, and the NHG, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But let me go actually from top to bottom. So the transfer tax is not something you have to take into account. VAT is already included in the purchase price. Registration and land registry, the same thing. Like I mentioned, you pay for the notary for the mortgage deed. It depends a little bit on where and what notary is being used, what the actual value will be, anywhere between 600 and 1100 euros. The transfer deed, again, is included. Mortgage broker or the bank, my suggestion would be to go to a mortgage broker, and VC is one of them. Reason why I'm saying that is because I always kind of like to make the following kind of like use the metaphor like the bank is kind of like a, how'd you say that, a shoe salesman, right? So you go into the store and they're like, oh, we've got these shoes and these shoes, and they won't say like, oh, but this might not fit you, so go to another store, right? We would suggest going there and there. No, but however, if you go to a mortgage broker, I consider them more to be like more of a personal stylist, right? They'll actually make sure that you know what all the products are that are out there, right? Find you something that fits and that you're happy with, and that you know what you're actually deciding and that you understand really the product. So my suggestion would definitely be to chat with Andrew and his team about the possibilities. Then you have a typical real estate agent. Good to be mindful is that real estate agents often charge a percentage of the purchase price, and that we at EHN charge a fixed fee. We don't understand why you would pay us more if you're already paying more for the property. So we charge a fixed fee. Or the appraiser, I'll skip that because you won't need that. The technical inspector, definitely a good one to have. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then you have the interpreter. If you don't speak the Dutch language, if you don't understand the Dutch language, you are obliged to have an interpreter there at the transfer, so you understand what is actually being signed and what you're signing up for. Then the bank guarantee. If you purchase your property, then at some point the seller will want to have a guarantee that you move forward, right? And that in case you back out or you don't honor the agreement, that he has at least something to actually, how do you say that? Something to get a fine from, and this is either the bank guarantee or the deposit. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the process as well, because I think it's a linear thing that is good to show you. And then we have the NHG. The NHG is an institute that offers you a certain guarantee. Let's say you buy a property and the value is 400,000 euros, you get a mortgage of the 400,000 euros, and then something were to happen, right? God forbid it happens. Maybe you lose your job, you lose a leg, or you lose a partner, or anything like that, and you weren't able to, or you're not able to pay the mortgage anymore. You'd have to sell your house, and let's say the value of the property has dropped below the actual amount you have outstanding in mortgage. Then the National Mortgage Guarantee actually offers you a security that they'll cover that. This is interesting because it also is interesting for banks to actually offer you a mortgage underneath that, because they have a more security. But there's also costs involved of actually getting the NHG. And I think that the 0.6% should be 0.7%, I think. So these are the costs involved of actually purchasing a property. Again, Andrew will also have like a little balance between what the difference is between a new build and a old-fashioned built property when it comes to these purchase prices. Then, okay, when you buy a property off plan, there are kind of like two stages that you pay for something, right? Initially, you pay for the actual land and the purchase price. So you pay for the initial land and the cost to actually develop. Now, later on, as you move forward in the process, right, and you actually have given the green light, you've given a mortgage and everything like that, and they can start constructing, then there's something we call a building deposit. So the building deposit is, how would you say it, almost kind of like a separate, well, it's part of the mortgage and so on, but it's kind of like a separate loan that the bank puts out, and they say, okay, hey, you can use this to expense the phases of construction, right? So let's say the foundation's been put in, and the second layer's been put in, and maybe the walls have been put in, and maybe the furnishing have been put in. All that stuff could be considered different phases in the process of building your new build, and the building deposit can actually be used to actually pay off those phases. Now, what is good to know is that the initial fee you'll pay, and you have to probably take a mortgage out for that. The building deposit is ongoing until the building has been completed, right? Please be mindful that when you do this, you will still live in a rental property or your current property that you've bought. So you'll have mortgage fees for that property, but you also have rental fees for your current property. So the costs for you will increase as you inch closer to the end of your end of the development of the project. But there's two stages. So when you sign that purchase contract and the transfer deed, and then actually the building and development of the project will take place, and then it'll take steps and phases for the actual amount to be deducted. Now, what does the process look like? Oh, that was nice. The process looks as follows. So let's start with the search subscription, right? So when you do decide to move forward with us or with somebody else, then you do a search. I'll talk a little bit more about where you can actually find new build listings. Let's say you found something that's interesting, then you subscribe, and then technically we can get a meeting with the seller or the developer, right? So we can go over the plan, and because technically there's no viewing option, right? So what you do is you actually go over the information that is out there about the property. Now, then you kind of like, of course, take that information back, right? And you review all of the information and documents. My suggestion would be to actually get a technical expert in to make sure that they actually dive deep into the technical part of it, because the developers, they create a very detailed, like, how do you say that, blueprint and documentation on, okay, what they're actually going to build and how they're going to build it. Now, that goes from where the lights will go to the power sockets, to all of these like details that are very good to be mindful of and to see if everything is there or if anything is missing. So my colleagues actually had a case where in order to actually get hot water in the kitchen, you'd have to pay a little bit extra because it wasn't in the plan. I was very surprised to hear that was even the case nowadays, right? But it's very good to dive into the details of what is going on where, because they often kind of like paint a very beautiful picture, actually make a beautiful picture, 3D picture, right? But getting into the details is super, super important, because what they often put in small letters is that the image that they're using to actually promote and sell the property is not necessarily what you end up getting, right? So make sure you get somebody in to actually do that. If you then, of course, want to have another meeting with the seller and developer, that is an option. Now, if you're interested and you've agreed to kind of like pay the purchase price and we're moving forward, then the signing of the purchase agreement and the building contract will take place. So the purchase agreement technically is you committing to the fact that you'll buy the property, and then the building contract is the contract with the actual developer. Also very, very important. Then with this information, right, the Andrew and the team can actually apply for the mortgage, right? Please don't wait to this moment to actually chat with Andrew and the team, talk to them before, because they can help prep with a lot of things before you actually sign the contract, right? So please be mindful that you want to do some pre-work before you actually sign the contract and have a clear idea on, of course, what is that you can borrow, what the terms will be, who to go for, and all these information that you can actually get from Andrew and the team. Now, then you have a bit of time to get your mortgage approved. This is great, right? Because once you do, then you can technically move forward. Very, very nice. Andrew will send you a big, nice letter or an email saying like, hey, you've gotten your mortgage. Congratulations. That's the hurrah letter, we call it. Then the deed of transfer will be signed. Technically, you'll then become owner. Please be mindful that there's a little bit of time between kind of like the mortgage approval and the deed of transfer signing. And also, yeah, no, actually that time in between where technically the seller or the developer, let's say you were to kind of like skip the country and bail, then it's very difficult for them to chase you, right? So the deposit I talked about a little bit earlier needs to be paid or transferred at some given point between the sign of the purchase contract and that transfer part. So then the building depot will be actually come available. So again, the bank will, it's kind of like almost a separate bank account that you can expense all of these phases to. That's the building depot. And then they'll actually start developing. Now, in my experience, developing always costs a little bit more time than they initially had planned. So make sure that you take into account a little bit of extra time. Of course, it really depends on where in the process you're stepping into, right? Some people actually will step into before the development hasn't even started, right? Some people will step into halfway or will maybe close to the end of it. We've also seen that, but take into account it's going to take a little bit longer than you often anticipate. Then, of course, get a technical expert in to make sure that the property that will be delivered is done in a proper way, right? That everything that you've agreed upon is in that property, and then delivery will take place, which will technically make you the proud owner of this beautiful property. Then finishing. So let's say there is time to kind of like put in all of the things that you, so maybe it's a good thing to mention is that when you buy a new build property, you buy it often kind of like completely empty, right? So things like kitchens, bathroom stuff, like that is something that you have to put in as well. This is something you can sometimes discuss with the developer, right? So they often offer kind of like these upgrades to actually add to it, right? And depending a little bit on when that's going to be finished, you'll have the delivery. And then if there's anything that needs to be updated or needs to be upgraded or needs to be adjusted or maintained, then you have a time frame to actually do that as well. And I think we'll talk about that in a few, because the guarantee is very, very important. So let's say you've moved in and no, let's take a step back. So let's say you have like everything on plan, you have agreed to everything, and then technically the land or the developer has not technically delivered on what you have agreed on. So we have this thing called a 5% rule. This is your right as a buyer. Um, and what it offers you is kind of like some security, right? And how do you manage this? You actually make sure that 5% of the deposit, often because the deposit often is 10%, 5% for the builder, and 5% goes to the notary. What you use that for is to make sure that in case the developer has not honored the agreement and there's things that need to be finished or that need to be updated, you can actually do and make sure you apply to that 5%. You can say, okay, hey, we're only going to free that 5%. If the actually developer has followed through on all of these things, right? For 5%, the 5% can also be used for common areas. This is if you, of course, buy an apartment with a lot of common areas. Again, the level of finishing as you agree to with the developer needs to be, of course, according to the agreement. And if they don't comply with that or haven't complied with that, then you have a little bit of leverage to actually put pressure on them. Also, you can also use it for if there's any defects after delivery, right? So you've moved into your property and you see that there's things not working, right? Then you can actually apply to this 5% rule as well. But this is something that needs to be, of course, discussed and allowed with the notary. And please be mindful of that. So there is some security, right? It's not like you have something on plan and then you have the delivery and then maybe a week or two later you find out that things are not as delivered as promised, right? You're not free or you don't have like it's not like you don't have any leverage. So you have this 5% rule. What does it say? Don't free the amount equal to defects. So what my suggestion would be is to make sure that you have a little bit more money kind of like freed instead of just the equal defects, because often it will take a little bit more to actually make sure these defects are taken care of. So again, this is your leverage that you have for the developer. If the interest rates of non-payment is too high, this is a good one. So this is the first point where I am at a blank a little bit, and I'll ask Andrew a little bit later what that needs to be used for. Then you have the guarantee. Again, you have the 5% rule, but you also have certain guarantees. Like for contract, there are standard guarantees. So 3 months after delivery, again, you use that for the 5% rule, right? So you can use the 5% to actually apply for any of those things. Initial 3 months, 6 months often is for maintenance, right? So if there's anything that needs to be maintained, and then if there's any hidden defects or major defects, then you have a certain number of years. And especially what you see often is when developers build these things, they also use contractors, right? And contractors often give them also a certain amount of years of guarantee. So again, I don't often see that there's a lot of defects in the beginning of the property, right? But sometimes you see as buildings are being inhabited more and more, that a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, there might be some things that are not working as they should. Maybe delivery is during summer, right? And then the year or 2 years thereafter, there's a heavy cold or heavy raining. Then you want to make sure that you can also apply to some of these guarantees thereafter. Now, there are also extra coverages if you go with one of these institutes, Woningborg, SWK, or Bouw Garant. And there's, of course, the bigger than 3 months after delivery. You can actually apply for this if you want to have like a 6-year guarantee or very specific parts for a shorter guarantee period, or if you want to have major defects and add another 10 years of guarantee. So you can actually get extra coverage for these things as well, of course, at a bit of a price. Now, where to find listings? Very relevant, right? There are a couple of places. So nieuwbouw-netherland.nl is one place where you can actually find a lot of new build properties. Then also, if you go to certain project websites, you can actually find them as well. If you go to Funda, which is probably the biggest website for property listings, you're often a little bit like later, because often the projects are servicing on the top part and the project owners' websites first, and a little bit later they will service on Funda. Or of course use us or the network of your buying manager, because we often or sometimes get actually off market property projects, or we're of course in talks with a lot of agents, and they sometimes say, okay, hey, keep our website in check, because a week or a month or 2 months from now we'll have some nice new projects coming up. So these are some of the things that you can actually look into. Be mindful, of course, we'll share this presentation, so you don't need to write everything down. Now, that was my piece. Sorry, I breezed through that a little bit. I hope it was clear, and I hope I didn't make too many errors. So thanks a lot. Andrew, this is your spot. Please take it away.
Thank you, Kimo. Maybe to start with the differences between existing houses and new constructions. Of course, Kimo already elaborated a bit on that. Keep in mind that with existing houses, you do have the purchase cost. The largest of that is, of course, the transfer tax that is applicable. So if you buy a property above the 450K and are, let's say you should assume already 2%, which is quite a large amount. Where you have with new construction the free by name, as mentioned by Kimo. So that's a large part that will not be taken into consideration. With existing houses, the market value is determined by an appraisal report. So you actually have an appraiser coming to the property, walk through it in like 15 to 20 minutes, and then determine the market price. With new construction, it's quite straightforward. So it's actually determined by the purchase price plus any additional work that you'd like to do on the new construction. If we can go, yeah, perfect. Maybe to elaborate a bit on that with an example, let's start on the left-hand side. Looking at existing construction, let's say you buy a property for 450K. The transfer tax is 2%. Well, you have some notary costs, appraisal report, mortgage fee, and also a fee for your real estate agent. Well, as you can see, the total cost of that would be around the 467K. You can only borrow 100% of the market value if you look at the existing construction, which would be the 450 that we assume now, meaning that the own capital that is required is roughly 17,000 euro. As I said, with new construction, it works a bit different. So you don't have a transfer tax. Notary costs are significantly lower. Normally, there's no appraisal report needed. So as you can see on the right-hand side, that the total cost would be around the 456,700, meaning that the own capital required is roughly 7,000 euros. So that's quite a gap, mainly caused by the transfer tax, lower notary costs, and the appraisal report. Let's get into more detail about the market value of new builds. As I said, that's determined by the purchase price, but that's normally determined by the cost for the ground and for the construction. But normally you also need some additional work to be done. You have to fill in something called a home improvement specification form. And on that, you can fill in the things that need to be upgraded or to be taken into consideration as well. It could be that you have a new construction which does not have a bathroom or a very basic kitchen that you'd like to upgrade. That total amount of actual extra work that you need can be financed in full as well. So always make sure to double check that also with the selling agency to see, okay, what's already included in the purchase price.
Does it already include a kitchen or a bathroom? Is the state of the bathroom as I would like to have it, or do I need to upgrade that? I need to put in some new floors to paint the property, for example. And that's why we see that in practice, normally people add roughly 5 to 10% on top of the purchase price. All of that can be taken into consideration and be financed in full if your income lets you, of course. A very important one that Kimo also noticed, keep in mind the double housing cost, because you already start paying for the mortgage as soon as the construction starts. That's a very important thing to keep in mind here. Normally what happens is that the price for the ground is paid immediately at the notary, and that the remaining amount of the construction, really building the property, is put in something called a construction deposit. It's called bouwdepot in Dutch. And every time you hit a new phase during the construction, so normally the construction period is, let's say, divided into 10 to 12 phases. Every time a new phase is hit or met, money will be extracted out of that deposit, meaning that your monthly payment is going to increase over time. So it starts at the, let's say, at the half of the regular mortgage, of the full regular payment, and then it increases over time the more of the property is finished, let's say. Since it's not really known at which phase it will be reached at what time, we always advise people to assume that they will be paying 80% of the new monthly payment during the construction period. So that means, as Kim already said, you'll have your new monthly payment for the new construction, but also your current housing costs, whether that's a mortgage or a rental property. So you do have to have enough savings to bridge that period, especially since construction periods could take up to 2 to 3 years. So always important to be aware of that, that during that time you will either save significantly less or have quite some savings to bridge that period. There are a few important things to keep in mind that has to be taken into consideration. If the construction has already started, there might be that there is something called construction interest that is applicable. Since the constructor already paid certain amounts in advance, it could be that they charge you an interest rate to pay that. These costs could normally be included in the mortgage. But a very important thing to keep in mind are the suspensive conditions that you see here. The selling agency actually has a period in which they have to meet certain conditions. So for example, they say, well, as soon as we sell a minimum of 70% of the properties, then we'll start building the new construction project. Could also be that an environmental permit needs to be attained. So normally we see these kinds of conditions as well. But that does mean that the selling agency has a period of normally 6 to 9 months that they still have to meet those conditions. Why is this very important? Because if you apply for your mortgage, your mortgage also needs to be valid. So the offerability of your mortgage application also needs to be valid to bridge that gap of 6 to 9 months. Not all mortgage providers provide you a long offerability that is needed as well. And some make also an extension between new construction and existing houses. So always keep in mind that you have to keep that in mind. Of course, we'll make sure to keep it in mind as well when you choose the best mortgage provider in your interest as well. Why? Let's say you have suspensive conditions of 9 months. We choose a mortgage provider where it's only possible to get an offerability of 6 months. Well, let's say they haven't met these suspensive conditions within that period. That means that you need to reapply again for the mortgage. As you might have known or seen, interest rates are increasing quite significantly. So this might have quite a significant impact on your monthly payments. We'll make sure to keep all these points in mind. Normally, the financial clause is also set for a period of 2 months, which should be more enough to cover everything. Of course, you can always make your own estimations online with a mortgage calculator. We also have one on our website, but might also be interesting to plan a telephonic appointment with one of our mortgage advisors so we can walk through your situation. It's free of charge. It's like 30 to 45 minutes. Walk through your situation, see how much you could borrow based on your income. see what could limit your maximum borrowing capacity, so we can well provide you with the necessary information so you can start well searching again.
Perfect. Now there are some final tips, and we can't say some of these things often enough, right? So check on the double cost, like Andrew mentioned earlier on as well. Consider the technical review of the documents. Make sure that you do your due diligence, right? Very, very important. You don't want to buy, and especially it's probably one of the biggest investments that you'll make in your life, right? Or at least in the foreseeable future. So make sure you really know what you're signing up for. Again, check the guarantee from the builder. What is in the contract, or do you want to take anything else out? Also calculate the extra cost in case there's any extra things that you would like to be done to the property, which often always comes to an extra charge on top of what you're actually paying for the property. So please be mindful of that. Even if it's an extra power socket, right, they might charge you for it. They have like often like these beautiful menus, right, where you can say I want this, this, and that, but it comes at an extra price. And again, also consider a technical expert for delivery to make sure that what you signed up for, what you bought, what is on the plans, actually your plans, is actually being delivered as well and in good quality. Um, we'll talk a little bit about the different packages that we offer. And by the way, there is time left for a Q&A, right? So please start popping your questions into the Q&A already. If Rafaela and Rick, I can't see them at the moment, but I don't think they're twisting their thumbs because I already saw a lot of questions being answered. But if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask them now. EHN, we have a new build package. What we do is we actually do personal intake. We conduct a search for you. Of course, you'll have access to a buy consultant consistently, right? We'll attend the meeting with the seller and developer. We'll review the new build documents as well. If there's a checklist or points of attention, we'll definitely walk you through it. We'll do a bit of a price benchmark. And of course, we'll submit the offer on your behalf. We'll help negotiate if there's any room. We'll review different contracts and, of course, offer pre-transfer support. And we'll assist in booking experts. So in case you do need kind of like a technical inspector or anyone else that is required in this process, then we'll help you set that up as well. And we charge 3,450 euros. Please note it's including VAT, so there's no hidden fees there. And also we charge to start a deposit of 499 euros. So good to be mindful of that. Then, Viisi.
Thank you, Kimo. So we also charge a fixed fee for the whole process. Normally it starts around the 2,600 euro. We can always check, of course, exactly what the fee is for your specific situation. All our fees are also published on our website, and our fee is also tax deductible. So you get roughly 1,000 euro back. We're completely independent, so we don't really care to which mortgage provider you go to, as long as they fit your specific needs. Our fee also includes arranging a life insurance, a disability insurance, and we also have in-house acceptation. So we already have mortgage acceptance working for Viisi, as you normally also have that with a mortgage provider, which will actually leads to shorter processing time. So could be really nice. We already have priority lanes with a lot of mortgage providers, which could mean that the mortgage can be arranged quite soon as well. And we're happy to help you with your whole mortgage application.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Then I think there's time and room for Q&A. Any questions we have still outstanding? And Rick, maybe you can ask them to the public, or to me, or to Andrew.
Yes.
I'll try to answer them as best as possible, of course.
Thanks for the webinar, guys. Was really helpful, I think. So far, we have only one question from Ella. Let me see. We already own an apartment, but we want to sell it and buy a new build. While waiting for a new build, can we keep staying in our apartment? And what if we want to keep our current apartment instead of selling it and change it to a let mortgage? What will be possible? So maybe Andrew, you can tell a little bit more about the buy-to-let mortgage.
Sure. Thank you, Rick. Ella, you can still stay in your property because, of course, you're waiting for the new build to be finished. So that's not a problem. What could be an option is that after you go to the new construction property, that we switch our current mortgage to an investment mortgage. But there are a few things to keep in mind. Might be wise to plan in a mortgage appointment with one of our advisors so we can walk through your situation. Because normally you should have already either paid off quite a bit of your mortgage or the market value should have increased significantly before that could happen. So make sure to plan an appointment so we can have a look to see whether that's possible.
All right, thank you. Question for you, Kimo. Are you or we as EHN acting as lawyers in the reviewing the contract?
So we are not lawyers. We don't have a legal background, and luckily, the notaries are considered to be lawyers, and they're also impartial in this case, right? So you should be mindful of the fact that they can only draft contracts which are valid, right? So legally valid. We will definitely review, and we've seen plenty by now, so we will definitely review them and see if there's anything that we need to pick up that we would like to change or we would like to add to it. But we are not lawyers in this case.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so Marco is asking for someone who keeps paying rent. I think it's more convenient to buy a pre-built apartment. Yeah, I think it depends on your situation, but yeah.
So whether you pay rent or whether you pay a mortgage of a property that you already own, right, you're still paying. And I think that if you pay a mortgage of a property that you already own, then often you're paying interest, but you also pay kind of like the principal, right? So you're technically paying off your current property as you pay your mortgage. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's much difference in the fact that you have to pay, but like it's not more beneficial to be a rental property versus a property that you currently own when you look for new builds to buy.
All right. Another question: is there a benefit if you're younger than 35 when buying new builds?
No, it's not linked to new build, but Andrew, it is linked to tax, and you guys are the financial specialists here.
Correct.
So linked a little bit to transfer tax.
Yeah.
So go take it away.
So there's no transfer tax if you buy something. So focusing on existing properties here, if you buy something below the 440K and you're below the 35 years, then there's no transfer tax applicable. But if you look at new construction, anyhow, there's no transfer tax applicable. So this is purely an advantage if you buy existing house.
Yeah. What we see often is that the people that join this webinar are not sure yet what they want to do, if they want to buy a new build or if they want to buy an existing house. So that's useful information, Andrew. Thanks for sharing.
Then a question about the current interest rates. Do you think they will increase in the near future, Andrew? Again, what are your thoughts?
Last ball.
Very, very difficult to answer that question specifically. They have been increasing quite significantly, of course, for the last 10 months. For your idea, if you buy, well, let's say you fix your interest rate for 10 years and you finance at full, you'd be looking now at interest rates of around the 4.6, 4.7%. And this was roughly, well, more than 3% lower a year ago. So that's a quite significant increase. What will happen in the future, we can't predict. That's a bit of the difficult thing. It's really dependent on how inflation is going to be, a war in Ukraine, a lot of factors influencing that. But as you can imagine, banks are buying in security or will charge a higher interest rate to be a bit more secure about their rates due to this, these let's say, uncertain times.
Yeah, we can't like do any financial forecasts from that perspective, right? That's a tricky one. One of the benefits of not being a financial specialist is that everything I say can be used for kind of like entertainment and educational purposes only, so not as something that you have to see the truth. But I think that in the foreseeable future, we'll see the trend continue a little bit, but indeed a year, 2, 3 years from now, it's very difficult to say. And again, I think it links to the fact that you don't want to necessarily time the market, but again, spend time in your property, right? Still, an investment in a property, I would say in the long run, pays off more than paying your money to a landlord who, well, then can pay his mortgage off, because technically that's how it works, right? So my suggestion would be to, if you do, or if your quality of life can increase or can stay the same while actually owning a home, my suggestion would be to actually consider that.
All right, thank you. Another question about the transfer tax. Is the threshold for 40 or 400? This year it's 400, next year 440. But again, it's only for existing.
Yeah.
If I find out about the property, about the project quite late, do the property prices change over time?
So not necessarily, right? So if you find the property, often you find it and there's already kind of like a purchase price stick to it. So you don't necessarily see the price go up and down.
All right, thank you. Again, the mortgage question, if I can get a mortgage of 500K and I already have 100K in savings, can I then buy a property of 600? And yeah, if you have 200 and 700 and so on.
Yeah, to be quite short with that or straightforward, yes, that's possible. You can put your savings on to buy the property that you want. If it's from abroad, if you get, for example, a financial gift from parents or something like that, there are no tax implications here in the Netherlands for that, as long as your parents, for example, haven't lived here in the Netherlands. So that couldn't be a problem, and you can also have a lower interest rate the more you put in. So really something worth discussing.
All right, thank you. In the situation of increasing interest rates, should applying for a monthly rate for the mortgage an option? I don't really know.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good question because some people say if the interest rates are rising that quickly, I could also choose for a variable interest rate, which is still like roughly 1.5% lower than fixing, for example, for 10 years. That could be an option, but keep in mind if you choose for anything shorter than a fixed period of 10 years, your maximum borrowing capacity drops as well. So if your income is high enough to do that, sure, that's not a problem. And then you have to monitor it a bit yourself because as soon as it increases significantly, it might be wise to lock it in again.
Thank you. And then I see another question, where to find the new build properties. I think it was mentioned during the webinar.
Yeah, it's in the presentation, and you'll get the presentation by email. So you'll find the link and everything necessary in there. And also look at this slide if you want to book in a session with either the VC specialist or with one of the EHN specialists. Then you can click on these buttons.
And then one more question. I saw that there are many phases of new build. When is the best phase to register / purchase the new build?
So I would try and get in as soon as possible because then you can still influence it, right? So sometimes the later you enter into the new builds, the less you can actually influence the new build, right? So my suggestion would be go in as soon as possible because that allows you the freedom to actually make it kind of like what you would like. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah, that's that. If you want to save a lot of money, right, or you will save a little bit more money, you can actually go in a little bit later, but then you risk the chance of not actually being able to buy one of those properties apartments because they're already all sold. So please be mindful of that. I think that was the last question. Again, thanks everyone for joining. Have a lovely Wednesday. I saw that the sun came out just now. I hope it's still there. I'm in a phone booth, as you can probably see. So I will see if I can actually catch some daylight still. Take care. Good luck with either buying a new build property or a non-new build. Again, we're happy to help you out in case you want to do it yourself. That is also perfectly fine. But my suggestion would definitely be chat to either my colleagues or to Andrew to get at least an idea of what you can expect more. So take care, everyone. Have a lovely day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.